Welcome everybody who's ever here as a guest. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We haven't had these before in other ones, but it's always something different. So thank you for joining us. We're going to hear from ACT engineers who we've retained as a township for a dredge permit, and then now also to deal with flooding solutions for 13 different neighborhoods. And this right here is for the residents of Cherry Quay, as we all know, and that's why you're here to listen. Along the way, if you have any questions, just raise your hand. If you have that hand button there, so that you can ask your question or make your comment about whatever section it is. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'll send it over to Carol.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Let me start by introducing the ACT team. I'm Carol Besky. I founded ACT Engineers over 29 years ago, and I'm happy to say ACT has a very successful history over the past 29 years of working with numerous clients in both the public and the private sectors. I serve as the Director of Public Involvement and Community Outreach, and over the years, I have led hundreds of public involvement efforts on projects for municipalities, counties, state and bi-state agencies, and they include projects that some of them may be under $20,000 to projects well over $500 million. Those projects include flooding and drainage issues to bridges, tunnels, turnpike and highway widenings, dredging, wetlands, shoreline restoration, and I've worked with numerous state and federal agencies in the process. Thank you to the Cherry Quay residents for joining us tonight. Let me say it was a very interesting beginning. And I would also like to say that we'd rather be there meeting with you in person and talking to you individually, but that's not yet to be with our governor's orders. So we're going to make the most of this and show you what we have developed in the concept design phase of the contract. Now, to introduce the rest of the ACT team, Rob Korkij is a licensed professional engineer and a professional planner, and he is the president of ACT Engineers and heads the engineering at ACT. Jeff Richter is a licensed professional engineer and a professional planner and is the director of engineering, and you're going to be hearing a lot of information from Jeff tonight. Both Rob and Jeff have years of experience in flood mitigation and drainage issues, and both Rob and Jeff have served as consulting engineers, as well as, which we're doing in BRIC, as well as years of experience in-house engineers, leading to engineering design on many municipal, county, state, and federal projects over the years. And next, I'd like to introduce Eric Rosina, Vice President of ACT and a Principal of the Environmental Services and Permitting. And Janetta Dix is our Director of Environmental Services at ACT Engineers. Both Eric and Janetta are experts in their areas involving the environment, but in particular, the area of environmental permitting. They both individually and collectively have very successful records in obtaining environmental permits for our clients from federal and state agencies, including NJDEP, NJDOT, New Jersey Tidelands, the Army Corps, just to name a few. They definitely think out of the box when it comes to obtaining permits for our various clients. In fact, ACT has a record of obtaining several permits for our clients that have never been issued before by NJDEP or by the U.S. Army Corps. It usually starts with the agency saying, no, we can't do that. That's not how we do it. And after a lot of hard work and persuasion and persistence, they are very successful in obtaining the desired permits. So tonight, if we look at our scope of work, just a quick review, ACT's initial scope of work under this contract is to gather and review existing information and data on the designated flood-prone areas of BRIC. We are identifying flood elevations and establishing solutions for flooding based on that information. And as you know, engineering is based on data, and there is a lot of existing information from the state, from the federal agencies such as NJDEP with existing LIDAR, as well as the Army Corps, the Bureau of GIS, FEMA, and from BRIC Township itself with all of its existing infrastructure data. With that information, we're able to develop mapping of the 13 designated study areas that the mayor just referred to, showing topography, giving us elevations, storm sewers, roadways, bulkheads, frequency of floodings, and other pertinent infrastructure information that we need. And then based on that information, ACT is able to develop and recommend conceptual engineering solutions specific to each of those 13 flood-prone areas. Solutions that can be advanced to engineering and then permitting and then construction. And as you know, tonight we're focusing on the Cherry Quay area of the township. So on this next slide, on the left-hand side is the list of the 13 study areas that we have been focusing on. And on the right-hand side is a picture, you will see the areas specifically identified for the study. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. And as was indicated early on, Jeff is going to be giving you a lot of information, a lot of statistics. And if you have a question, don't hesitate to interrupt him and ask him because he's really good at explanations. So Jeff, it's your turn.
Thanks, Carol. As Carol indicated, this slide shows the 13 study areas listed on the left-hand side of the slide. You'll notice the Cherry Quay is number 5. On the right-hand side, you'll see an aerial map of Brick Township with the study areas highlighted in yellow with a blue number next to it. So you can find Cherry Quay is over to the center left. You'll see Cherry Quay outlined in yellow there. The blue areas represent the low-lying areas that are inundated, or low-lying areas that are inundated with flood waters even during a minor flood event. Let's go to the next slide. This slide is 2 representations of the Mantoloking tide gauge. They're both taken from the same tide gauge. The reason we wanted to show this is that there's 2 sources of information that neighbors and engineers look up data for flooding or for the tides in the Barnegat Bay and in Brick Township. One is the Stevens Institute of Technology, which is on the left, and the one on the right is from the National Weather Service. Now, this is important. Another reason we have this is I want to explain the datum, which is the vertical datum that's used by the Stevens Institute. You'll see it references an NAVD 88. That datum means the vertical datum that's used to establish elevations. Now, NAVD 88 is the datum that we're going to be used in the slides that follow. Everything we reference to as far as elevation is going to be referred to NAVD 88. Now, the reason NAVD 88 is important is because that's the survey datum that surveyors use to collect topographic information. They use that datum when they're staking out improvements, whether it be roads, homes, storm sewer systems, etc. Everything is nowadays is referenced to NAVD 88 datum so that everything is consistent. So that's the datum that we're going to be using going forward. You'll notice on the National Weather Service that there's a difference of 0.4 feet. So you've got to be careful when you look up the floods or the tidal ranges to see what datum you're on. If you're using the Weather Service datum, you need to subtract 0.4 to get to the NAVD 88. Okay, next slide. This slide is a graphic representation that shows the various tide elevations in Barnegat. You'll notice the mean high water elevations, MHW, is 1.09 feet, and the mean higher water elevation is 1.33 feet. That's represented by the MHHW. For Cherry Quay, the red line represents the lowest road elevation, which is located at one of the storm sewer structures along the roadway. So you'll notice that the lowest elevation is 1.82. And for this conceptual design for all 13 communities, we're looking at a conceptual design of between 1.4 to 2.0 as our target elevation. So you can see that getting a 2.0 from 1.8 is not very difficult to get to that elevation. It doesn't create as many challenges as some of the other neighborhoods do. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this slide is again the Mantoloking tide gauge. And again, the elevations are on NAVD 88. Along the bottom is the years, and you'll see that it runs from 2006 to 2020. There is a gap in the data from the end of 2019 to the beginning or mid 2017. During this time, the gauge was not operational and data was not being put forward from the USGS. Up the left-hand side is the elevations. You can see it runs from 0 up to 4. And the blue, all the blue up and downs, that represents the fluctuation in the tide. Obviously, the high tides are the as it goes up, and then it comes down to the low tides. The low tides, even in most cases, are below the 0 line, but that's less of a concern than the high tides. And you can see our concept design elevation of 1.4 to 2 is the yellow band that goes across the slide. And why this is important is because you'll notice that the majority of the high tides are occurring below the elevation 2.0. There are several instances where you'll note that the tide did peak higher than that. In fact, on the center of the page at the top, 12, 21, 12, it peaked at 3.38, which is almost 3.4, which I'll explain what that means later. But you can see that there's very few instances over the course of that time where the tide peaks higher than that. Now, I will note that this tide gauge information does not include severe storms like Superstorm Sandy or any of the hurricanes. The tide gauge is the data that's collected during those events is not reliable because it exceeds the range of the gauge. So the USGS does not post that data in the tide gauge records here. And then the last thing on this slide is you'll notice at the bottom there's a dashed red line, which over the 14 years from 2006 to 2020, there was roughly a 1 3/4 inch per decade increase in the average tide elevation. Okay, the next slide. Janetta? Okay. And this slide, we're showing the community flooding impact assessment. Now, the thing we looked at here, you'll notice on both charts, on the right-hand side of the chart, there's numbers. And at the head of that column, it says number of dwellings with compromised access. So you say, what is compromised access? We considered compromised access to be if the properties that had frontage on flooded roads or needed to travel through a flooded section of road to get out. So if you lived in an upland area that doesn't flood, but there's only one road out for you to get out of the area that's flooded, then you're considered compromised access. So the chart on the left was our short-term design approaches. And this was properties that were impacted to less than or equal 2 foot, a 2 foot flood elevation. And you'll see that Cherry Quay has 2 dwellings with compromised access when the tidal waters get to an elevation of 2. On the right-hand side is our impacted greater than 2 foot to 3.4 flood elevation. And you'll see the 3.4 flood elevation map in just a little bit. But this represents the long-term design approaches. And in this, Cherry Quay has 23 dwellings with compromised access during that particular flooding event. Okay, next slide. Okay, this slide shows an aerial view of the Cherry Quay area. You'll notice a little bit of blue up at the top left and spattered throughout the area. The blue represents a flood elevation of 2.0. And if you remember, that goes back to the yellow band. The top elevation of that yellow band was an elevation of 2. The orange reddish areas are inlet structures and outfalls to the bay area. And the numbers represent the elevation at the inlet castings, the inlet structures. So you can see a lot of them are above 2. You've got the one at 1.88, but you've got some in the 2s and 3s and all the way up to 5 when you get up towards Starboard Road. Okay, next slide. Now this slide shows basically the same thing. The only difference is the yellow represents the low-lying roadways that would be below an elevation of 2. Now this is based on current available LiDAR data, which is topographic information. It's from an aerial. So those are the low-lying areas that would collect water at an elevation of 2.0. Okay, next slide. Mentioning back to when I mentioned the 3.4, that we would come back to that elevation. The blue now represents the inundation that would occur at a 3.4 foot flood event. And as you can see, there are significantly more roadways and properties that are impacted during this type of an event, though this event occurs on a less frequent basis. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the conceptual flood mitigation design approaches that we looked at for Cherry Quay, we've got short-term in the middle, which are design elevations less than or equal to 2 feet. And the tide gauges reflect that you hit in that range of under 2 foot occurs 1,500 plus minus hours per year. So it's fairly frequent. So for this design approach for this particular situation, the recommendation would be to install check valves on the existing storm sewer system to prevent floodwaters in the bay from backing up into the storm sewer system and ultimately into the roadways. On the right-hand side, we have long-term design approaches. This is for when the tide or the flood event raises the water above an elevation of 2. And based on a tide gauge information, this flooding occurs 60 plus minus hours per year, which is significantly less than the short term. To address these type of flooding events, it would require, again, the installation of check valves, potential raising of roads, driveways, properties to blend into the new roadway elevation, raising of bulkheads, and potentially pump stations, depending upon the total amount, which would really depend on the final design of the solution for long-term mitigation. Next slide. This slide is a graphic representation to indicate how raising of roads helps to mitigate floodwaters. As you can see, the blue would represent the water. On the bottom, we've got the existing road elevation, which would be the black line. The left side of the street would be without curb, and the right side would be curb and sidewalk if those existed, and how that would taper up to the homes. Now, the orange would be the elevated roadway, curbing, sidewalk, and property grading. And you can see how in concept that you're able to get less water in the gutter and potentially eliminate all the water altogether. Now, what this type of mitigation does is it improves vehicular access during normal tide events so that you can get in and out of your property to safe ground if necessary. This solution may require driveways, sidewalks, and yard improvements to blend the property into the new roadway elevation. Stormwater, there's also stormwater impacts and mitigation, which would have to be addressed during final design based upon more exacting data for the neighborhoods that are being designed. And these solutions would need buy-in from the neighborhood, because there would be potential work on private properties to make the blending of the grades so that water doesn't get backed up onto the properties and is able to flow to the street and the storm sewer system. Okay, next slide. This slide shows graphic representations of what raising the roads might look like. So on the left, we've got the red line would indicate the raising of the road, the top of the the top of the arch would be the new road elevation, and the bottom flat red line would be your existing road grade. And the one on the left, this particular situation, possibly due to limiting factors such as adjacent first floor elevations or garage elevations, it may not be possible to get all of the water, have a completely dry situation. So we're showing that there could potentially be water still in the gutter, represented by the blue. And again, that would be a case-by-case basis, depending upon how high roadways could be elevated. And again, the limiting factor is going to be existing conditions on private properties. Okay, the one on the right shows a different situation, the same situation with the raising the road, but on this time on the sides, we're showing a little bit of additional raising of the roads at the gutter, and then tapering into the properties. In some instances where you have higher garage elevations, as you can see, the white car and the gray truck, that sits up quite a bit higher than the existing roadway. So it would be possible to raise the road high enough to get all the water off of the streets during typical storm events. Next slide. This slide is a graphic representation of how a check valve could improve the situation. The top graphic shows the situation without a check valve. And to the right, you see the green bulkhead and the bay, if you will, on the right in the blue. And then you've got the long pipe that comes up to 2 inlets. What happens during tidal events without a check valve is the water will seek a level. So whatever the level is in the adjoining water body, larger water body, you're going to get the same elevation in the streets, properties, etc., as it backs up into the pipe and actually comes out of the inlets. So you can see this graphic representation shows the pipe being filled with water, the inlets filled with water, and the gutter of the roadway filled with water. And depending upon the elevations of the neighborhood, that water could extend, the entire property, a portion of the property, or over the crown of the road, etc. So the bottom graphic shows what a check valve is intended to do. In this situation, the graphic that we're showing here assumes that the water body never gets below the drainage pipe, and then it gets to about the elevation in the inlets. So when the water starts rising again, the check valve closes and will not let any water further into the system. So therefore, while the bay water is higher, you can still maintain lower water elevations in the storm sewer system so that you don't experience flooding in the streets or properties. If, for instance, the main thing with the check valves is the condition of the outfall point. If it's submerged all the time, or if it becomes, if it sees daylight, if you will, when the tide goes out. If it sees daylight when the tide goes all the way out, you have a better chance of having a dry pipe and dry inlets, for a more significant amount of time. Because once the water drops below the pipe, the pipe and inlets will all drain out. The check valve will let the flow go back into the bay side. However, when the tide starts to rise again, the valve's going to shut. Whatever water's in the system is going to stay in the system until the tide goes back down, or the waters on the upstream side have more of a higher height, if you will, than the bay, so that it can force the water back out into the bay. Okay, next slide.
Sorry, Jeff, you're freezing up every time you say next slide.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of a delay.
All right, that's all right.
Sorry.
No problem. So then one of the other possible solutions is to raise and stabilize shorelines. This could be accomplished through bulkheads, living shorelines, rock revertments, or other type of methods to provide a buffer between the water body and the improved areas, properties, roadways, etc. These samples show pictures of bulkheads. You can see the one in the upper left corner is a newer bulkhead, but it's lower, appears to be lower than the bulkhead to the right on the property to the right. The one in the middle, you've got some rocks, and right between there, there's a little opening through the bulkhead. So it kind of defeats the purpose of the bulkhead. While it does allow water to drain out from the roadway, that's fine when the tide's out, but when the tide's up, the tide's coming back in. So, it would be better if there was a storm sewer system there with a check valve so that it could keep the water on the other side of the bulkhead. And then again, a picture on the right, again, you can see a much older bulkhead and a newer bulkhead next to it at a much higher height, which doesn't do anything because you can see in the center there's a board missing from the older bulkhead. So it defeats the purpose of both bulkheads by allowing water to bypass the bulkhead even before it crests over the top of the lower bulkhead. So those are the type of things that would need to be repaired, replaced, etc., to prevent floodwaters from backing up into the roadways and private properties. Okay, next slide. Okay, back to Carol.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay. So next steps moving forward, we're going to be updating the topographic mapping in specific areas as we move towards the engineering design. Where the township and ACT will continue to identify and pursue funding sources such as those from the United States Army Corps of Engineers, from FEMA, from New Jersey Office of Emergency Management, NJDOT and their local aid programs, as well as other potential funding sources. And we're going to work with the township to identify and recommend revisions for future design standards for township ordinances, and work with Brick Township in developing strategies, allocating funding, and moving to implement, which leads to final design, obtaining the necessary permits, and then going on to construction to relieve the flooding in the areas designated. So that's really all that we have now before questions. And I want to apologize because when I talk, my mouth actually does move. So I'm going to give it back to you, Joanne, for questions and discussion.
Well, I think the mayor wants to give an update to the
Great.
residents on the call too. So
Yep.
why don't we let him-
Yeah, so from a township perspective, who's here is, Joanne Bergens, our business administrator. Our township engineer is here as well, Alyssa Cummins, and our two of our councilmen, Councilman Art Halloran and Councilman Vince Minichino, are all here. So if you have questions for the township, hopefully one of us can answer those, or for ACT engineers who just gave the presentation, you can be able to ask those questions as well. But just to give you an update as far as funding for things like this, we have been funding along the way, including recently. We're in the process of spending $200,000 on those check valves that were mentioned during the presentation, and those will be starting to be installed over the next few months. And then, in addition to some different elevations and things that are going on around the town, is from this point forward, we're going to be spending $1.5 million at a minimum. That's in addition to the regular projects that are out there with regards to flooding issues. So when I became mayor, I wanted to have a debt reduction plan. So for capital projects, I instituted a limit of capital projects at the sum of $8.5 million a year. And by doing that, my plan was to save $1.5 million off of our debt. Over the course of my first 4 years would have been $6 million. And actually, I was lucky enough to get a second term, so I'm in year 7. So if we just followed the original plan, we would be at 6 plus 7, 8, 9. We would be about $10.5 million at this stage. But we're actually saved a lot along the way because we changed the way we do other things. So the debt reduction plan is over $25 million at this point. So our debt is $25 million less now than it was when I became mayor. So what we're going to do is from this point forward is increase our capital budget to $10 million a year, with that last $1.5 million above the $8.5 that we have been doing to go to these types of flood projects around the town to help out, because it is a serious issue. It impacts a number of residents. As we saw, there's 13 different neighborhoods, so to speak, that are impacted, and to put this extra funding towards that is going to give some ease and some relief to a lot of people of their fears of the water encroaching. So at this time, we'll take any questions, again, for Act Engineers or for the Township. We have a number of representatives here. Does anybody out there have any questions? I guess we'll unmute.
They're all self-muted.
Okay, everybody out there who is a guest, you are all self-muted. So you see the microphone, you would have to unmute yourself and make a comment or a question.
So we have one from Nicholas.
Okay.
Is there a question from Nicholas Gallup? Would you like to ask? But he's muted, so let's make sure I'm going to ask you to unmute, but you'll have to actually unmute to ask your question, Nicholas. Same with you, Alyssa. I see you're trying to
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. This is Rhonda DiStefano, not Nicholas Gallup, but I do have a question.
Okay.
The presentation was originally supposed to talk about Tunesbrook, so I don't know if that's separate and apart from Cherry Quay. I mean, they're right next to each other for all intents and purposes, and there were a couple of line items on one of the slides that I looked at that talked about Tunesbrook as well. But is there going to be anything different regarding Tunesbrook, or what we're talking about here? It's the same thing regardless of which of the neighborhoods you're in.
So yeah, Tunesbrook was, we covered the Tunesbrook area last Tuesday, the 16th.
Right.
So that video is available on,
perfect.
for your review on our website. You have to click on that link that talks about, let me see exactly what we called it. Give me one second.
Perfect.
We called
Thank you.
it Beaver Dam Creek.
Right. So you're going to go on our township website, right? There'll be a link for flood,
Brick flooding.
brick flooding. Okay. Oh, it's on the last page of the presentation.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's up on,
No, the last page was a mistake. It had Beaver Dam Creek on the last page.
Okay.
That's probably why I got confused, because it did say Beaver Dam on the last page.
Yes,
It
on the
should have
last,
said Cherry Quay.
right.
Okay, so on the bricktownship.net floodplain information, I can get that information, right?
Right. So when you go there, all right, we're going to go on there for a minute just so anybody who's on the call can, hop on there. Sorry, I'm doing it live with you, so give me a second for the page to catch up. So under menu, you're going to go to floodplain information. Okay, and that's where it talks about this this meeting, and I guess I'm looking on my phone, so it's a little bit different. So if you scroll down all the way down to this is the page. So maybe I'll just go on the home page and look for events. I'm sorry, I'm going to find it for you. I'm sorry, I'm holding everybody up. All right, so I'm going to do. It is on our website. The link's on the website. I just can't locate it, so I'll email you tomorrow, and I'll point you to it. You could watch the presentation and look at that one specifically for Beaver Dam Creek. Is that all right?
I think she's muted again.
I didn't touch it, so that's people muting themselves.
Yeah,
So we just need your email address in order to email you tomorrow with the link.
It'll be on the township website under. I can't believe it. I've done it 1,000 times.
Thank you. I think I'm back. Somebody unmuted me. Thanks. I'll look for it tomorrow or later.
It's on the floodplain management page, and you're going to look for a section that talks about meetings, and it'll say upcoming, but then will say look at all meetings, and it'll take you to a link to the ones that have already occurred. And then you could pick the one for the Beaver Dam Creek area.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, and if you can't find it, just call my office at 732-262-2933.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Sorry for that. I was hoping I
okay.
could find it while I had you on the
That's
call.
fine.
Sorry. There any other residents that have any questions for the engineer or the township? I'll try unmuting everybody just in case. See, it says ask me, and it's not me. That's done. But I'll try it again.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, sorry, I think I've been on mute, but I finally got it off. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can. And
Oh, thank
who's
you.
this?
I'm Donna Delanoy, 98 Seagoing, and I want to thank everybody, Mayor, Joanne, the engineer, Alyssa, ACT, all of you. Thank you so much for all of this. My husband and I have been active in pursuing this, so we appreciate this very much, all the work that you've done. And Mr. Richter, just a question for you about the flood elevation. If you can help me with that, what is the flood elevation of Seagoing Road? I know it's on the slide. I can view that at a later time, correct? The slideshow?
Yes, it will be on the website at some point tomorrow.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Richter, the elevation of Seagoing Road, would you just speak to that for a moment, please?
Yeah, the elevation, the lowest point on Seagrown Road is 1.88.
Okay. And the elevation, is this correct, is 1.4 to 20?
Correct. That's the target, the target design range. So for this particular neighborhood, 2 would be the ideal. You know, you can get to 2 because you're much higher. There's other neighborhoods.
Can you put that map up with that which shows Seagoing Road on the yellow and the red and all that?
Janetta, can you do that for us?
Yeah, she's getting it. The one with the yellow, Jeanette? Next one.
Instead of wasting your time.
There you go.
Oh, thank you for that.
So I had the one on before because it has the elevations.
Okay. Why don't you click back to that one real quick? So you can see where the yellow is. And then you can see the elevations there. Well, you got 1.87 and you got a 1.88 and a 1.82. So in that area is under 2.
Thank you. I just wanted to see that again. I appreciate it. Okay.
Does
And,
that answer?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Does that answer your question, or feel free to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I missed that, and I just wanted to see that again. And so my other question is for the mayor. Mayor, when, I know this is just a very big question, and you did address this. Do you have any specifics regarding time frame, specifically on the check valve installation?
Well, we have ordered the first set of
With the,
check valves, and I don't have that list with me. Melissa, do you have that list of Seagoing on that, or?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can now.
Okay. So we are out to bid for the check valves right now. I believe we're on the street as of today, and the bid opening is scheduled for July 1st. And once we open that, we can award the contract and start purchasing the check valves. There are 2 locations on Seagoing Road that are on the list. And then I had been in contact with Chuck Camella to talk about some other areas in the neighborhood on Friday, Thursday or Friday.
Plain information.
Oh, one word.
All right,
Did
so
that answer your
Alyssa, may I ask, I'm sorry, another question?
Sure.
So if it's out to bid July 1st, again, is there a time frame at all?
So once we open the bids and award a contract, we have to have a pre-construction meeting, set up the vendor queue. I would say by August, we could see valves. It depends also too on how long it takes the manufacturer to produce them, depending on who the low bidder is. Some places have certain valves in stock. Others are made to order. You know, you tell them what you need, they don't stock up mass varieties of them, but our pipe sizes are pretty typical in brick. I mean, they're 18-inch pipes, they're 12-inch pipes. It's not like we have any kind of, 20 by 38 elliptical pipes that we need a valve for that's specific.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, we're opening the bids, we're receiving bids on July 2nd. We wouldn't be able to award the contract till the next council meeting after that date, which I think is on the 12th. So we would award the contract, hopefully on the 12th, the mayor's checking the calendar. And
14th.
the 14th, that was close. So then we'll have hopefully we get bids in and we're able to award a contract on the 14th. So we would meet with the contractor, within the week or 10 days after that and make sure all the paperwork's in order. So we'll know more and we will send an update to folks because there's lots of people asking about that timeline. So we'll keep you informed with the timeline as, these crucial milestones are met.
Thank you.
And I believe, Chuck, you're on with a question?
I am, yeah. Sorry I'm late. I got in late, and I did have one question. I missed the opening portion of this meeting, but my question is relating to the pond that is existing behind Cross Trees Clubhouse and Port Road, and it borders on the opposite side of Boom. And right now, we know that the storm drains that were there that used to allow that to drain no longer function properly because they've been closed up for multiple reasons. I know at one point, Tara Paxton and I talked about this. I know Alyssa. Hi, Alyssa. How are you? Good, thanks. We talked about this as well, probably 2013, post-Sandy. And I know there was a grant that was applied for, a federal grant that was rejected because of other priorities. Is there a plan to take care of that? Because when the tidal water comes up, that water stays there for many weeks until it basically goes back through the earth and back into the lagoons. At one point when it was tidal, of course, it would ebb and flow with the tides. That's the question.
But I have no plan to address the pond in Cherry Quay at this time.
Okay, understand. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't see any other questions from the public. I'll just give another second, see if anybody raises their hand or asks a question. So this, for any of your neighbors that you may talk to in the coming days who were not able to participate, this will be on our website tomorrow. For the folks that are on today, if Alyssa has your contact information, I'll send it out. I'll send a PDF with a link for people who want to actually watch the meeting via Zoom. So we'll send it out. We'd like to get as many people as possible to watch so that they're participating and are aware of what's happening. So we'll get that out, and thank you for sharing that with any of your neighbors in the area.
Oh, great. No, I appreciate it. I'm sorry, this is Chuck Camille again. I'll post whatever you send to me via email out on the Cherry Quay Facebook page and send a link as I did about a week ago.
Oh, great, Chuck. That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Councilman Minikino or Halloran, do you have anything you'd like to add?
He's muted.
He's muted?
Yeah. It actually, I kept getting a message that read, host will not allow guests to unmute themselves every time I tried to unmute. So I don't know if other people had that problem as well.
Well, everybody who's on here, I have asked to unmute. So if they,
I did not have any questions.
Okay, if they mute themselves, then they can't then unmute themselves. So that's requires me to have to go back a second time, which I don't mind, but I think that's creating some confusion. All right, I don't see anything else. Do you?
Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll keep you advised as things go along, and Chuck will send out that email link to you. Have a good
Great,
night,
thank you.
everybody.
Thank
very
you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good
Okay.
night.
Okay,
Good night.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.